When I was 14 years old, a conflict arose between my sister, my mom, and me over a situation that would ultimately lead to a major family rift. This was about a year before my parents got divorced, a time when tensions in our household were already high. My younger sister had a tendency to spend her allowance very carelessly, treating it like it was endless. She would blow her money on things like makeup, fast food from the mall, video games, and trendy clothes from a store called Hot Topic. Meanwhile, I also received an allowance, but my dad wanted me to learn the value of hard work. He required me to earn my allowance by doing chores around the house and taking care of the yard. My sister, on the other hand, rarely did any work, and when she did, it was only because my dad was there to supervise. My mom didn't enforce any chores on her either unless it was just to clean her room so she could earn some extra cash. During this time, I was saving up for a scooter to help me get around town. Over the course of 2 years, I worked hard doing odd jobs and saving most of my allowance, and I managed to stash up about $2,000. However, accumulating that amount of money was a real struggle. My sister was always aware of where I hid my savings and would sneak in to take money from me. I still remember one particular argument that happened between us. One day, I confronted her, "Hey sis, did you take my money again?" She looked back at me with a feigned innocence, saying, "What? No?" It was clear she was lying, and I could tell because whenever she was caught, she resorted to her usual tricks. "You're a terrible liar," I replied. "There's $100 missing from my savings." She brushed me off, "Leave me alone, I didn't do it," and then started to fake cry, running to our mom for support. In that moment, I felt powerless. "Mommy, my brother is picking on me," she wailed. I felt compelled to defend myself. She stole from my savings again. But my mom interrupted, snapping her fingers and insisting, "Shut up. Can't you see Mama's little girl is upset? She said she didn't do it, so she didn't do it. If you don't drop this right now, I'll ground you." I was frustrated. "I know she did it, and if you don't get the money back, I'll get Dad's help." "Now, there's no need for that," Mom replied. "Besides, you don't have any proof she took your money." I stubbornly responded, "Yes, I do. I keep a ledger of every dollar I earn. It showed $400 3 days ago, and now it's only $300. $100 is missing. Plus, you know she's stolen from my savings several times already. She spent all her allowance for the month, and you took her shopping just yesterday. Where did she get that money from?" After a moment of hesitation, my mom scowled and said, "You know what? You're grounded. Go to your room, or I'll get the belt." I knew from experience that it was pointless to argue further, so I walked to my room and slammed the door closed behind me. I took out my old Nokia cell phone and tried to call my dad at work. He didn't answer, so I left a message explaining everything that had happened. About an hour later, he returned my call, saying he would sort it out. Not long after that, I heard the landline phone ringing in the kitchen, followed by my mom yelling at my dad on the other end. I couldn't make out everything they were saying from my room, but it was clear my mom was trying to defend her position. Eventually, I heard her shout, "Fine. If she really took the money, then you can pay it back because she already spent it." Mom then swung open my door, furious. "I can't believe you ratted me out, you little ingrate. After everything I do for you, you couldn't just let a little money slide. Are you admitting that my sister took it?" I asked, hoping to catch her off guard. She sneered back, "You know what? I don't care. Girls need more money than boys. You should just be giving it to her anyway. It wasn't even that much. It wasn't just a little money." I shot back. "She stole $100 from me. Even if it was just $1, I would still want it back. You wouldn't want someone stealing from your purse. It's no different if my sister steals from me. She's guilty, and you know it. I want that money returned because I worked hard for it while she did nothing." My mom's response was dismissive. "My baby doesn't have to do anything. I put in a lot of effort to earn what I had, and despite my hard work, my sister did nothing to contribute. My mother treated her like a princess, believing she deserved special treatment, while I felt the opposite." I expressed my feelings to my mom, saying that my sister could enjoy being a princess away from me and my belongings. My sister, who was younger, reacted angrily, threatening me physically. I stood my ground, looking her straight in the eyes, realizing I had grown quite tall and strong from all the outdoor chores I did at just 14 years old. I told her to go ahead and try to hurt me, but I wasn't going to accept her bullying since I had done nothing wrong. For a brief moment, my mother froze in surprise after our confrontation. Then, with a loud scream of frustration, she swung her arm to knock something off my dresser in a fit of anger. However, she miscalculated and ended up hitting the dresser itself, which looked painful. She grabbed her hand, trying to suppress the pain, while giving me an angry glare and grinding her teeth in frustration. After a moment, she turned and stormed out of the room. I could hear her making a ruckus as she yelled and slapped the walls, heading down the hall, down the stairs, and into the kitchen. This was her typical reaction when things didn't go her way. She would head straight for her wine fridge to get drunk. Meanwhile, my sister was watching from her bedroom door, and her expression changed to one of horror. She quickly retreated back into her room and slammed the door shut. My mother had always been her shield, the person who let her get away with so much, but that was beginning to change. A few hours later, my dad returned home from work. He marched my sister into my room and made her face me. He forced her to admit she had been stealing from me and informed me that I was not grounded for the incident. My sister refused to meet my gaze the entire time, looking down as she was made to apologize to me. At first, her apology was so quiet I could barely hear it, but my dad insisted she speak louder until she was practically shouting her apology. Dad then handed me a $100 bill to compensate for what my sister had taken and told her she was grounded for a week. He added that the money she owed would be deducted from her allowance. My sister immediately burst into tears, calling Dad awful before she fled to her room in distress. Meanwhile, my mother remained on the back patio, completely ignoring the situation and drinking her favorite wine. She never apologized to me and often pretended like none of this had ever happened. My sister still received her allowance, but instead of Dad giving it to her, it was my mother who slipped it to her. Days passed, and on my dad's day off, we visited a local store where he bought me a combination safe to keep my cash and other small valuables secure. We decided not to inform either my mother or sister about the safe. I set the code to 4962, which I still remember, and placed all my money inside before locking it and hiding the safe in the back of my closet. Weeks went by without incident, but one day after I returned from mowing lawns for neighbors, I discovered my room had been completely ransacked. I called out to my mother to report what my sister had done. Unsurprisingly, my mother refused to acknowledge it. She insisted my sister couldn't have been the culprit. When I pressed her about the messy state of my room and reminded her that it had been clean when I left, she became visibly annoyed and defensive. She finally conceded that my sister might have done it, but dismissively said that I had it coming for not being kinder to her. Frustrated, she stormed off, leaving me to deal with the mess. I called my dad again, leaving another message on his work voicemail to tell him what had happened. I then went to my sister's room, confronting her about tearing apart my room. Before she could respond, I mentioned my safe, explaining that she could no longer access my money. This sent her into a full-blown tantrum, and, of course, my mother rushed to her defense as always. I simply repeated that my sister would not be able to get to my money anymore and went back to my room to clean up. My sister continued to scream in her room for the next 20 minutes. Fortunately, nothing was missing or broken, just thrown around and scattered. As I picked everything up and arranged it back to its original state, I felt a sense of satisfaction, perhaps the most smug I had ever felt while cleaning my room. But the very next day, I discovered it was a wreck again. I discovered my room was a total mess again, and this time it was worse than before. My window was broken, and to my astonishment, my sister had thrown my safe out of the window because she couldn't figure out how to open it. In shock, I immediately called my father to explain what had happened. When both of my parents returned home from work, my sister shamelessly admitted to what she had done, almost as if she was proud of her actions. My mother, instead of defending me, tried to side with my sister by saying that I shouldn't have had the safe in the first place. However, my dad stood firm and scolded her, explaining that he had gotten the safe for me because he was tired of my sister stealing from me. Each time she took money from me, he had to give me back what I lost since my mother never helped. As a result of the chaos, we needed a new window for my room, and my dad decided to install a lock on my door for extra security. He also bought me a combination lockbox where I could keep the key to my room conveniently next to the door. My sister was grounded for a month as punishment for breaking my window, and during that time, she spent all her time sulking in her room whenever my dad was home. Whenever my dad left for work, my mom would let her go back to playing video games or watching TV. I chose not to say anything about it, knowing that if I did, both my sister and mother would likely team up and make my life even more difficult. When her month-long grounding ended, my sister began to beg me for money every time she spent her entire allowance. I decided to call her out, pointing out that she would never pay me back because she never saved any money. To make a point, I even created an IOU document to see if she would actually sign it in front of our dad. Predictably, she tore the paper in half and ran to complain to our mom about how mean I was being. My mom then tried to pressure me into giving my sister the money, but I reminded her of what my dad had said about the situation, making it clear that if my sister wanted any cash, it wouldn't come from me. After this incident, my mother even suggested sending me to military school, but my dad refused to allow it. For those wondering why my dad didn't help me set up a savings account during this time, the truth is unclear. Perhaps saving cash was just how our family operated back then. One particular incident comes to mind shortly after my dad had given me the safe for my money. He also installed a deadbolt lock on my door, along with a wall-mounted lockbox that required a code to access the key. This decision was made after my sister had thrown my safe through my bedroom window. My dad and I installed the lock and lockbox together while my mom and sister were out. Once my sister returned and walked past my room, I noticed her glance at the new lock before running to get our mom. They both stormed up the stairs to confront my dad and me. In a conversation that I can still remember clearly, my mother snapped her fingers and pointed, demanding to know what the lock was for. My dad calmly replied, explaining that it was necessary because my sister kept stealing from me and ransacking my room without facing any punishment. He insisted that the lock would stay. My mom objected, claiming that I was only 14 and shouldn't have a lock on my door. My dad countered by reminding her that he paid most of the mortgage and bills and was tired of her favoritism towards my sister, which caused me to suffer. In a moment of frustration, my mom demanded to know the code for the lockbox, but my dad refused, stating that he couldn't trust her anymore. Fuming, my mom stormed off, while my sister stood there pouting before slowly retreating to her room. With the new lock in place, it became a habit for me to secure my door whenever I left my room. I noticed my sister and mother staring at me while I entered the code for the lock, but I always made sure to block their view with my body or hand. They clearly disliked this, but there was nothing they could do about it. One day, later in the month, my sister approached me, begging for $40 to buy a video game she wanted. I couldn't help but ask her why she kept coming to me for money when she never paid me back. Why do you keep coming to me asking for money when both of us know that you will never pay it back? It's frustrating because every month, you spend all your allowance on things that you want instead of focusing on paying back what you owe me. I hear you say, I'll pay it back, I swear, but deep down, you know that isn't true. You have a pattern of spending everything you have before even thinking about settling your debts. It seems like no matter what happens, your priority is always on getting new things. When I confronted you about this, you insisted that things would be different this time. To put our agreement to the test, I went into my room, grabbed a piece of paper, and took a pen. I decided to write an IOU contract that clearly stated you would pay me back the $40 once you received your monthly allowance. To make it official, I also mentioned that Dad would co-sign it as a witness, emphasizing how important it is to have someone verify such agreements. After reading the paper, you started to sniffle and, in a moment of frustration, tore it in half before running off to Mom, crying. This reaction was typical for you whenever things didn't go your way. You'd always seek comfort from Mom, and I could almost predict what would happen next. As I heard you sobbing, I imagined Mom responding in her sweet but concerned voice, "My little princess, what happened now?" You explained the situation, saying that you just wanted to borrow a little money and couldn't understand why I would make you sign an IOU. In response, Mom defended you, saying she just wanted to borrow some money. I stood my ground, arguing that I needed her to sign the IOU to ensure she would pay it back. In an unexpected twist, Mom reacted strongly, her frustration mounting. She expressed her anger at me for needing paperwork, saying I was just like Dad for wanting a record of everything. At that moment, I turned to head upstairs, feeling justified in my actions. I muttered under my breath that at least being like Dad was better than being like her. Mom's anger flared, and she began shouting at me to come back. But by then, I was already at my bedroom door, locking it shut. Mom had a habit of barging into my room to yell at me, but I wasn't going to let that happen easily this time. She attempted to push the door open, but since I had just installed the lock, she wasn't used to it. When she lunged at the door, she hit it hard enough to make a loud thud, and I could hear her fall to the floor. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door, shocked by the sight of her sprawled out and crying in pain. She had slammed her body against the solid wood door, resulting in a swollen lip and a bump on her forehead. I couldn't help but point out, "Mom, you did this to yourself." With my own sense of victory, I added, "You are grounded. Get out of my sight." After that chaotic interaction, I called Dad, expecting him to take my side. However, he simply groaned about the entire situation. He said I wasn't grounded but still in trouble for teasing Mom. He planned to deal with her when he got home. As expected, Dad did give me a stern lecture, and I ended up with additional chores and a smaller allowance that month, but it could have been worse. From that day forward, whenever you asked me for money, I insisted on having you sign an IOU. This tactic didn't sit well with you at all. It became clear that you really didn't like it. The situation escalated further when Mom tried to send me to military school by forging Dad's signature. That plan backfired on her. After standing up to her the last time when she threatened to spank me, she seemed to realize that I was no longer afraid of her. It made her hesitant to approach me physically. Instead, she mostly opted to yell at me from a distance. Life continued on this way, with me focused on school and various odd jobs to earn my own money. As my 15th birthday approached, Dad surprised me with an engine kit for my bike. He explained that saving for a car was a better idea than getting a scooter, which I agreed made sense. I felt excited about the future and my plans to save money for a car. However, a few days later, while I was sweeping grass off the patio after mowing the lawn, I found a pamphlet for a military school. It had been hidden under a chair near where Mom liked to sit and drink her wine. The discovery made me pause and worry about what she might do next. I had a nagging suspicion that she was plotting something wild, so I decided to wait until my dad got home before revealing what I had discovered. When he finally arrived, his expression showed he was quite upset, but rather than jumping to conclusions, he took a measured approach. He grabbed the pamphlet I had found and went to have a serious conversation with my mom. "Dad, honey, what's this?" he asked her, holding up the pamphlet. Upon seeing it, my mother's face went pale, instantly betraying her nervousness. "It's nothing," she insisted, "I've never seen it before." My dad wasn't convinced. "Really?" "Because it suggests that you're thinking about sending Kegel to military school, and you know I wouldn't agree to that." That's when my mom finally dropped her facade. She yelled back, "He needs to learn some discipline. He locks his door all the time, and I can't even spank him anymore because he's too big. This is the only way I have left to punish him for being such a disobedient brat." My dad countered, "Kegel did nothing wrong when he stood up to you about your unfair favoritism. If anything, it's our daughter that acts like a brat because of you and the way you spoil her. You let her get away with stealing from her brother. As far as I'm concerned, this discussion about sending Kegel to military school is over. If you try to send him, so help me, I will do everything in my power to stop you." Mom snapped back, "Well, I guess this whole family is just going to strip away what little power I have left in this house. If I have nothing, then I may as well be nothing." Dad rolled his eyes at her dramatic outburst. "Kegel is growing up and is his own man now, with his own money. You need to recognize that." With that, my mom stormed out of the room, clearly frustrated. The following morning, before I left for school, I noticed her furiously trying to shove something into the kitchen trash bin. After she left for work, I couldn't resist the urge to dig it out to see what it was. What I found was an application for military school, completely filled out in her handwriting. The document specifically required signatures from both parents. I quickly recognized my mother's signature, but the other one was an obvious attempt to imitate my dad's intricate and smooth signature. It was painfully clear that she had tried to forge it, a fact that she would later regret. After confronting her about it, she must have realized her mistake and abandoned her plans to send me away. I decided to keep the papers and later showed them to my dad. He was angry but realized she had already taken such drastic measures, and he chose not to dwell on it too much. However, he did file the papers away in his office just in case they needed to be referenced later. A few months later, more shocking news came to light. My mother was having an affair with an old boyfriend from high school. This revelation became the breaking point for my dad, leading him to file for divorce. Soon after, I moved in with him. A few months later, once he had bought another house, he expedited the divorce proceedings by bringing out the military school application that my mother had forged. This wasn't the only evidence he had. He also found proof that she had forged his signature on a credit card application and at least one other document that I don't remember at the moment. This made her fear facing legal consequences for fraud. The court process unfolded quickly because she agreed to most of his terms. My mom ended up with the house since my dad didn't want it, but she also insisted on alimony and child support, as my sister had chosen to stay with her. The judge awarded my mom child support and a minimal amount of alimony, which was mostly meant to cover my sister's allowances and expenses. Mom was furious about the outcome and threatened to drag Dad back to court, but he held the forged signatures over her head for years, effectively silencing her threats. On the day I moved to Dad's new house, my sister mockingly stuck out her tongue at me, boasting that Mommy told her she was the princess and the more deserving sibling, which was why I was leaving. I simply shook my head at her accusation, telling her that she could think what she wanted because I no longer cared about her opinions. I walked out the door, finally feeling a sense of liberation wash over me. However, my relationship with my sister only deteriorated further after that. When she visited Dad's house weekly, our interactions were filled with tension until we eventually stopped communicating altogether. Eventually, we reached a point where we no longer communicated at all for several years. During this time, the lack of conversation became a normal part of my life, and I did not feel any strong desire to visit my mother's house. It was not the same place as before. She had transformed my old bedroom into a home office. This change felt significant and made the idea of going there less appealing. I had many memories tied to that room, but seeing it used for something so different simply added to my disinterest in returning.